You're at a party. Someone makes a joke. Everyone laughs. You smile too, but a half-second late, and for a completely different reason than everyone else. You caught the structural flaw in the punchline while they were still laughing at the surface. The moment passes. You stand there holding a drink, calculating your exit, wondering for the 10,000th time what's wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. But something is different. And the difference has a name, and a surprisingly well-documented history. Here's something researchers didn't expect to find. In 2016, evolutionary psychologist Satoshi Kanazawa at the London School of Economics and Norman Lee at Singapore Management University published a study in the British Journal of Psychology. They pulled data from a long-term survey of 15,000 adults between 18 and 28 years old, a large enough sample to take seriously. And they were trying to understand what actually makes people happy in daily life. The answer, for most people, was predictable. More time with friends. More frequent socializing. The data confirmed what most of us assume without questioning: humans are social animals, and more connection equals more satisfaction. Except for one group. For people who scored higher on intelligence measures, the pattern reversed. Completely. More frequent socializing with friends predicted lower life satisfaction. Not the same. Lower. The more intelligent a person was, the less they seemed to benefit, and in some cases, the more they seemed to be drained, by the same social contact that made everyone else feel better. Kanazawa and Lee called this part of what they named the Savannah theory of happiness. The idea is that our baseline psychological needs were shaped on the ancestral savannah, where small group social bonds were essential for survival. Most people still draw deep comfort from those kinds of bonds. But people with higher intelligence, the theory goes, are better equipped to pursue long-term, solitary, abstract goals. Their brains found a different path. And frequent social interaction can pull them away from it. Carol Graham at the Brookings Institution described it plainly. She told the Washington Post that people with more intelligence and the capacity to use it are less likely to spend so much time socializing because they are focused on some other longer-term objective. This doesn't mean intelligent people don't need connection. It means the form of connection they need is different. Rarer. Harder to find. And that scarcity is where the struggle begins. Here's what most people miss. The common assumption is that intelligent people struggle socially because they're socially incompetent. Awkward. Robotic. Unable to read the room. But research doesn't actually support this. A meta-analysis by Nora Murphy and Judith Hull found that cognitive abilities comprising general intelligence are part of the social skill set needed to decode emotions accurately. Smarter people, on average, tend to be better at reading social and emotional cues, not worse. So the problem isn't a missing skill. It's something more like a mismatch in operating systems. Think about it this way. When you sit down for small talk about weekend plans, about the weather, about whatever show everyone's watching, your brain is running what you might call level 1 social protocol. Light, frictionless, low stakes. It builds warmth through familiarity. It doesn't require much processing. For most people, this is genuinely enjoyable. For a highly analytical mind, the same conversation triggers a different process. The brain begins abstracting. It looks for patterns, deeper implications, questions underneath the questions. It moves faster than the conversation does. And it starts to notice the gap. Not with contempt. Usually with a kind of lonely frustration. A feeling of standing on the shore watching boats that don't stop. Psychotherapist Jean Syod Fakin, one of France's most recognized experts on people with exceptional abilities, speaks about the deep paradoxes of highly intelligent brains, wired for depth, operating in a world that mostly runs on surface. The brain isn't broken. It's just running different software. And when two programs can't talk to each other, communication fails, even when both programs are working perfectly on their own. This didn't start in adulthood. The misfit feeling that intelligent people carry, the sense of being perpetually out of sync, has roots that go back to childhood. Specifically, to something developmental psychologists call asynchrony. The Columbus Group, a collective of gifted education experts, defined it in 1991 in a way that still holds. Giftedness, they wrote, is asynchronous development in which advanced cognitive abilities and heightened intensity combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. Crucially, they noted that this asynchrony increases with higher intellectual capacity. What asynchrony means in practice: a child whose mind is racing ahead at the speed of a 12-year-old, while their emotional regulation and social intuition are still catching up to age 7. The intellectual self and the social self don't arrive at the same time. And in the years between, which can stretch for a very long time, the gifted child is caught in a gap. Other children sense it. The enthusiasm that the gifted child feels about ideas gets read as arrogance. The questions they ask get read as showing off. The labels follow quickly. Weirdo. Know-it-all. Nerd. A 2025 study noted that these labels often arise specifically from the misinterpretation of gifted students' enthusiasm for learning, perceived as superiority when it's actually just interest. Sometimes this escalates beyond labels. Sometimes it becomes something harder to shake. And here's what rarely gets discussed: the child adapts. They learn to mask. They learn to dim the beam. They figure out, early, that safety comes from performing a version of themselves that fits more easily into the room. This pattern, of performing sociability while feeling fundamentally alone inside it, often persists for decades. There's a particular loneliness that doesn't get named very often. It's not the loneliness of having no one around. It's the loneliness of having people around and still not being reached. Of being in the room but not in the conversation. Of performing connection while knowing, somewhere underneath, that it isn't quite real. In 2023, a study published in Trends in Psychology conducted qualitative interviews with highly gifted young adults in their late 20s. One of the most striking themes that emerged was what researchers called existential loneliness. The participants described a continuous feeling of not being understood and experiencing little or no attention for who they really were, not just in childhood, but throughout their early school years. The lack of fit with their environment wasn't just uncomfortable. It accumulated into something more fundamental, a question about whether they could be known at all. This isn't dramatic. It's statistical. Finding a person who thinks at a similar level, with similar depth of curiosity, who also happens to be emotionally available and in your social vicinity at the right moment in life, that's not common. Loneliness for highly intelligent people is rarely about rejection from the tribe. It's about finding the tribe's daily rituals less rewarding than what the mind is already doing on its own. A 2024 study in Gifted Child Quarterly examined 403 students in the top 10% of cognitive ability for their age group. It found that individual differences in intelligence and personality, combined with social context factors like peer acceptance and friendship quality, all predicted loneliness over time. The picture that emerges is layered. It isn't just about being smart. It's about navigating a social world that wasn't really built around how you experience it. Not everyone experiences this the same way. For women, the social cost of intelligence carries an additional layer that research has documented with uncomfortable clarity. Studies examining attitudes toward women in traditionally male-dominated roles found a consistent trade-off: the more competent a woman is perceived to be, the less likable she tends to appear. Conversely, as men ascend in perceived competence, their likability tends to rise with it. For a highly intelligent woman, this creates a specific kind of social pressure. The same qualities that earn respect in a professional context can quietly erode warmth in a personal one. She learns to navigate this. To choose, constantly, between being seen as capable and being seen as approachable. To calibrate how much of herself she shows, depending on who's watching. This calculus is exhausting. And it is a form of social struggle that has nothing to do with skill or personality, and everything to do with how the environment responds to her. It's worth being honest here. The research on this topic is more contested than most popular accounts suggest. A 2018 study by psychologist Ruth Karpinski, drawing on data from members of American Mensa, found that those at or above the 98th percentile of intelligence were significantly more likely to report diagnoses of mood and anxiety disorders compared to the national average. Karpinski noted that high IQ can bring unique intensities and overexcitabilities that are both remarkable and disabling. But this finding has been challenged. A later study using data from the UK Biobank, drawing on more than 250,000 participants, found the opposite pattern. People with higher general intelligence in that sample actually showed lower rates of general anxiety and were less likely to be socially isolated. The Karpinski study, critics noted, used only Mensa members who self-reported, a sample that isn't representative of high-intelligence people broadly. What this means is that the relationship between intelligence and social struggle isn't a law. It's a tendency. A pressure. A set of conditions that make certain things harder in certain environments, but not a destiny. And a 2025 study on the well-being of intellectually gifted adults concluded that drawing reliable conclusions across this entire field remains, for now, genuinely difficult. The lived experience, though, is something many people recognize without needing a definitive study to validate it. There's a moment that some people describe, a moment when something shifts. When they stop trying to be the version of themselves that fits most easily into the room. When they find, finally, one conversation that goes somewhere real. It doesn't fix the statistical problem. The mental peers are still rare. The gap is still there. But something changes when you understand what the gap actually is. It's not a character flaw. It's not damage. It's the byproduct of a mind that arrived early to a world that was still building the infrastructure to receive it. You weren't too much. The room was just the wrong size.